Welcome to the State of UI UX Testing 22 Results with Dan Giordano. A web developer turned developer marketer, Dan Giordano has over a decade of experience building and growing open source tools and services like Swagger, Jenkins, Selenium, Gatsby, and others. And he enjoys translating the benefits of these new technologies to businesses of all sizes. He's the Senior Director of Product Marketing here at Applitools and was instrumental in developing the survey and analyzing the results.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the State of UI UX Testing Results webinar. Today, we're going to have a pretty interactive session like Pam shouted out. We will be asking you basically the question that we'll be talking about in a poll. Please respond with the interface. Then we'll be going over the results of that question as it pertained to our participants in the survey. And then we'll look at the poll results for the webinar here. So we'll kind of do a live survey as we go through. And when we are talking about the results from the survey that we gathered, we'll be talking a little bit about the challenges, why we asked the question in general, what we're looking for, some of the trends that we might see from past surveys, and then also how Applitools might be affected by that trend or might solve one of the problems that we're looking at. So without further ado, we can kick this off. The first one we're actually going to look at is not a question at all, but actually just look at the demographics of the survey itself and what we polled. So we had over 820 individual companies respond to our survey, which was about a twofold increase over our last survey that we ran. So great participation, really solid results, I think, from a broad canvassing point of view. Individual contributor was our number one. Makes sense. A lot of testers consider themselves individual contributors. A lot of testers are out there writing the tests themselves, running tests. Management in the QA world, usually about 5 to 6 testers per a team. So definitely teams are growing in general, but most people that answered the survey were identified as an individual contributor in their role. So also job function along with this. So quickly, most people QA engineers or an SDET, so software developer and tests, writing, again, automation scripts was probably about 40% respondents or 45%. Manual testers were next. So still a pretty broad manual testing group. And we'll talk a little bit about test automation scripts in general and how much or what percent companies are automating. And then we had a smattering of different roles, which is great to see. Again, this was the UI UX. We broadened our survey from just visual and front-end testing to really, or visual testing to really encompass the entire front-end world. So we wanted aspects of front-end development. We had back-end developers in here. We also had a good chunk of designers. So designers, developers represented about 30% of our respondents. So great to see other job functions in the world. All right, so we will get to our first question, and it is on the design front. I'll take about 30 seconds per question so we can kind of get through that and get moving. But the first one up, do you use a design system? So we'll give 30 seconds. I have a timer here. So let's look at the respondents from our survey. Do you use a design system? The majority of users actually did use a design system. A good chunk emphatically used a design system. And obviously, or honestly, I was surprised coming from kind of the testing world, and design systems are generally a little bit newer, a little bit lower level in the engineering. So it's great to see again, modern front-end design, development, testing, all kind of working together, and that testing team being aware of the design system. So way more than 50% are using them, which is great to see. Design systems like Storybook and design systems coming from the design tools we'll talk about kind of in the next slide. They are a fantastic way to speed up design development. Also testing, though. Testing is actually one of the biggest advantages of using that design system. You can think of it like unit testing for front-end components. So maybe a small button that gets changed in a hyper localized environment in your storybook components. A tool, a functional testing tool, a visual testing tool can go through and test that small component just for making sure it looks good in that one environment, making sure everything's not wrong. And then we can do more integration testing farther down the road. But it really allows us to shift left and catch those bugs early on. All right, next up. All right, sweet. So our results. Yes, you can see here more than 40% use one heavily, and even 27%. So that is more than our survey, which is great to see. And again, I think most people really see the benefits of using a design system, of being able to publish components to a centralized library and test there. All right, so next question. What design tools are you or your team using? So again, we'll give about 30 seconds. We'll go through there. There's a bunch of different popular ones here, so please select the one that you may know that your team uses, that you use yourself, or if you're not familiar, just fill in the NA. All right, so this was actually no surprise. Our results here, Adobe and Figma leading the way. Figma is a new vector-based tool. It is based in the cloud. It is used in the web browser. It is an extremely powerful tool. We love Figma here. It also works really well with the design system. So you can publish your components from Figma right in a storybook with some really kind of fancy glue, but it looks like we're moving in that direction. Adobe is definitely the stalwart that has been left over for the last 20 years. They've been a leading Photoshop tool, design, graphic, and web design tool. They've really progressed a lot of their cloud offerings. They have the Creative Cloud that offers a lot of the same advantages to Figma, but it's great, again, to see these two tools leading the way. Sketch, InVision, Miro, those also were in the running. Obviously, they are used at some particular shops. Sketch is also similar to Figma. InVision, though, has seemed like over our trends has dropped in overall use. So from a peer perspective, InVision definitely not used as often as Figma, which again kind of rose probably 5-6 years ago, probably founded now. All right, Figma. You can see here in our results, 56% of respondents using Figma as their daily driver for their design. Again, makes sense. It is by and large the new, easiest to use, most powerful tool. It's got a great community. It has a bunch of plugins and templates that you can use from the community to really help speed your design development. It thinks a little bit more like a development canvas. So you can design in Figma for the web, for mobile devices in a very consistent manner. So again, we love Figma here, use it all the time. And obviously from our poll respondents, it is definitely the majority of users. All right. So next poll question. What type of application are you involved in testing today? So the broad majority of users are testing web applications. That is really no surprise, since I think the broad majority of applications in general are web applications. Mobile applications here is distinctively native mobile. When we think about native mobile, I personally think of large organizations, either big retail shops, big banking, big insurance. Your phone probably has 40 to 50 apps. You probably use, I don't know, 20 maybe consistently. So again, there's just a smaller portion of the general market doing mobile application, but it's still great to see 45% is in there. Web application, it was almost touching 90s in our survey, which makes, again, a ton of sense. The web is ubiquitous today. We see it on mobile browsers. We see it on desktop browsers. And I think there's kind of a growth in front end ability that a web application is able to handle today. I think a lot of the a lot of applications that 5 years ago may have been mobile application and wanted to be developed natively, now can be developed using React, using some of the smaller frameworks that are underneath that to really build pretty powerful applications, again, that are accessed totally in the browser. Now, from a testing perspective, this presents a ton of, again, pros and cons, a lot of challenges. It does make some things easier compared to mobile testing. Getting your environment set up, just interacting with web applications is general a lot easier than mobile applications. We all have multiple browsers on our machine. Getting a phone simulation set up, side loading an application, all those things are a little tough. Web applications are usually a little bit straightforward. Also, there's a lot of great technology that has come out recently. You can think about the different frameworks that are built just for kind of this modern front-end web, like Cypress, like Playwright. All of those tooling really, I think, advance the testing space on the web side. Now, difficulty, accessibility is a huge concern. Different screen sizes is a lot. There are a lot more options on the website than mobile. Web in general, there are a lot more architectural paradigms. There's a lot more frameworks, programming languages getting involved in the building. Mobile application, usually you pick a framework, it's much more constrained development kind of in a box, which has led to a lot of testing tools that are specifically oriented towards those. So you kind of have this more proprietary land over in mobile, which again makes some things harder, but certainly makes some things easier, especially manipulating your tests and automating in general. All right, so let's look at our results here from the crowd. All right, yeah, this is huge. So you can see here, web applications, almost 96%. Again, a lot of web applications are used, and they're ubiquitous at this point. We'll get through this. How many different languages do you test for? Majority test for a single language, as different answers go, but it is interesting to see that over 50% are testing for more than one. So like when we talk about languages, we're talking about actual native, I think, translation of applications. So you have your application in English, you might have a German version, you might have a Spanish version that you are natively translating on the development side. So testing those is obviously very difficult. It's a big time drag. You're going to add at least 100% of the time that you're spending today. It's going to be 2x, but it's also often going to be more. Writing the test is going to be harder when it's a second language, no matter what language it is. And then execution time, you're just going to execute 2, 3, 4 times as many tests per language. So you're really going to slow that down. So it is, I think, super interesting to see. There's not a really broad testing solution around localized testing. I think Applitools and Visual AI is one of the best ones. Being able to recognize languages, being able to extract text out, build a baseline branch for that visual test, and then continue forward. Really, it does allow for a functional testing across multiple languages in a way that I don't think traditional tools answer, but certainly it is kind of on the cutting edge of testing. I think the most mature teams are looking at how they can broaden their testing across multiple languages. All right. I would say the next step down from multiple peak maturity in your testing is how many different browsers you support going back. Again, oftentimes we see this in more regulated markets like banking, insurance, that not only does the latest version of Chrome need to be tested, but multiple versions back. You're using banking systems that aren't allowed to progress and update the latest one. So we will need to test more historical versions. So 3 to 5 is the large majority. That is a big number when we talk about the exponentiality of creating tests, right? So you have one browser, let's say Chrome, you have 3 to 5, that's already 3 different test suites we're gonna have to run for each test case. When we talk about multiple browsers, again, that's just gonna exponentially increase. So We have 3 browsers, 3 each, 9 now test suites we're running from a single test case. That can drastically increase our release times and slow down and really make QA more of a bottleneck than it has been in the past. So browsers are something here that, again, UFG, ultra-fast grid with Applitools, we rerun our tests across browsers in a different way. We're not rerunning the entire browser, so we can see 90% time reduction. And this really does affect teams that are doing multiple browsers, multiple versions back. Let's go back. All right, different browsers, 3 to 5. We can talk about the math here, and Safari is one of them, which is funny. I would say the big 4, Safari, Firefox, Chrome, and now Edge, probably is landing in that bucket in the middle. So again, 3 to 5. The 4 are generally accepted as modern browsers that any application should support. So it's good to see here. 2, going to be the next majority. Again, Safari, Chrome today actually would probably be the leading edge for most consumer applications. B2B might see a different smattering mix. You might have a little bit more Edge in there. Firefox, unfortunately, really has dropped off in usage and become a bit more of a niche privacy browser in the last few years. But it is great to see still so many teams cross-browser testing and making sure their application works across a wide variety. The versions we talked about before, just the current. So when we talk about just the current, that means the latest one that comes out. When we light up Cypress, when we light up Selenium, it's going to automatically grab the latest browser if you have that set. I think Chrome, we're up to like 103, 104 right now. I might be off by a couple, but it happened so quick. And the next one here, 3 to 5. And then 2, so again, what we were talking about before, still pretty good portion of that exponential testing, where once you go more than one browser and you're going one browser version back, you're going to have this really tough to deal with matrix. You're going to have to prioritize things if you are testing in that traditional light. UFG and the ultra-fast test cloud with Applitools, we can rerun those tests. We're not rerunning the entire end-to-end. We're simply re-rendering the DOM at that present time across them. So we can run in parallel in huge heaps and cut that testing time across browsers. Last one that has to deal with this. So how many different mobile devices are you supporting? So this is native mobile alone. Native mobile is really difficult to test for more than one device, yet I would say it's the most important. Mobile devices, tend to be fickle between them. iOS 13 running on a Pro Max screen that is maybe 30% larger than iOS 10 that didn't have the Max. There's going to be a lot of different rendering issues there that we can visually catch with the native mobile grid. But again, you see a lot more proliferation of testing different devices here than web. All right, so to get you back in the scope of our interactive tests, what part of testing front ends, hang on, I'm sorry, that is not what question is this. Let's move that around, sorry. What percent of your tests are automated? So out of all your tests, what percent are you automating? What percent are you running manual? So percentage base, we'll give you 20 seconds to answer that. All right, so this is one of the most difficult to break down. The percentages are a little bit all over the place as far as order, but I think it's really interesting, actually, the results. So the most common answer here was 51 to 75%. So a pretty good chunk of users are automating more than half their tests in that respect. The next biggest chunk, though, was actually 26 to 50. And then there's still a pretty good chunk below that. So 0 to 25, which represents blue and orange here, plus the teal green, it's adding up to over 50%. So you can say the majority of respondents are actually using, or most of their tests are manual. That presents a huge opportunity for growth in not only our own processes, but also in bringing about solutions that can better solve problems for testers that are manual testing or really difficult use cases. So I think that's really a big aspect here, is that when we talk about manual versus automated, a lot of the more mature and difficult tests or test types are difficult to automate. So when we talk about visual testing, when we talk about accessibility testing, when we talk about performance testing, a lot of those are the types that the solutions that have been trying to automate are a little bit laggard, right? So functional has pretty much been the creme de la creme. Most of the solutions do functional testing in a very DOM-driven way. That has been generally easy to automate. When we talk about automating these other ones, solutions like Applitools with visual AI and able to do accessibility testing, visual testing, cross-browser testing from an automated standpoint, this is totally new, I think, and again, a reason why, while you might think that a lot of your testing is automated, there are certain aspects of your testing strategy that are still manual almost 100%. So again, I think that really is what bakes in to some of these results here. I'm interested to see if we overthink on the respondents here, that we automate more so than the fact of our respondents in the survey. So I would say it's very similar. A good portion here is still manually testing. So less than half of their tests are automated, which is, again, really, I think, enlightening to see in the market, just because a lot of vendors always talk about automation. We're already there. We're already doing continuous integration. But I do think that there is either a forgotten about bunch or a left behind bunch that is either, again, doing a lot of manual testing on really difficult aspects of testing, performance, accessibility, et cetera, but also running tests in a continuous fashion outside of their CI/CD process. So we've seen this more and more as solutions like e-commerce has arisen, static applications that have a CMS feeding into it. They're not kicking off CI/CD builds. So a lot of these teams are running their tests in a manual fashion on a daily basis, coming in, checking whether their homepage still looks correct with updates from maybe the marketing team or an e-commerce team with new items. So really interesting to see this one hold up, I think, across the board. So this one is, what parts of front-end testing do you find most challenging? So there are different functions here or different problems, but accessibility testing in general, just the fact of doing accessibility testing and being up to A11Y standards. Locators are hard to find and break. Location testing, and again, some of that localized language-based testing. Performance testing, the fact that UIs are constantly changing, or UI frameworks, which are also constantly changing, are difficult to work with as a tester. So we'll give 20 to 30 seconds. This one, to me, is actually near and dear to my heart. I think it's also the most difficult part of front-end testing. I've done a lot of testing with back-end and front-end, back-end on the API side, with Swagger and mocking a lot of the data. There are less changes that are constantly happening, and changes are a bigger deal. Many times there's a lot of planning going into versioning an API. When you design an API, you're designing for 6 months, a year, 2 years for that API to basically not be touched. So there's a lot of work up front doing it. With the front end, I have not seen the same proclivity to keep things the way they are. Certainly, we are constantly changing the UI, whether that be CSS changes and styling, or whether that be layout or event-driven actions with some JavaScript. Front ends are constantly changing. It is the one difficult thing about writing tests that I think is constant. When I spend a day writing a test for a feature, and in 2 months, you have to then rewrite that test because either something has changed in the application, we have new data that maybe an A/B test failed, or maybe something passed and we want this to now be permanent. But there is constantly a smattering of changes that need to occur on the front end. So writing tests can be disheartening. You feel like you write a lot of this logic, a lot of difficult automation, and only for it to be thrown out of the window. So certainly, to me, I also agree with that being the most challenging. The other ones also are interesting but also not surprising. Locators and the DOM constantly changing with frameworks, constantly getting obfuscated with a lot of these new frameworks. They like a messy DOM, not to be copied. That really wreaks havoc with a lot of things that testers are doing. So the traditional way of approaching DOM and maybe even using XPath holds up less, and tests are becoming flakier. Also, UI frameworks, difficult to deal with. There's a lot of new ones. There's new ones every week, it seems like. Next, Gatsby, Remix. All of these, while making maybe development easier, making testing from a unit testing perspective, many times it makes end-to-end testing more difficult. So that is certainly something to keep an eye on as kind of the JavaScript, I think, market or ecosystem matures, and hopefully we find a few frameworks that can stick around. Performance testing, accessibility testing, also noticeable there. Location testing comes in last. I'm going to presume that location-based testing, like our answer before, is just not commonly done as much. All right, so our answers. All right, so a little bit different than our survey results. Number one is still leading. So UIs are constantly changing, pain in the neck to test. And then the second one here is performance testing, which again, I actually would expect to be second. It is something that automation is really difficult to capture. There's only so many things that you can automate and get a reading for before you actually have to experience the degradation or what the performance feels like in a slow system. So that coming in second is no surprise to me. The constantly changing application UI, talk about being close to heart. Applitools, I think it's maybe the biggest benefit of using a solution like Applitools is the ability to maintain tests in a quick fashion. Not only tests that are updating, but tests that need to have multiple versions and baselines. So if you're running a lot of A/B tests, if you're constantly having a UI that looks one way on Monday, looks another way next week, because your developers are constantly keeping up, shipping things quickly, Applitools being able to just quickly update its baseline and not need a new set of logic to test, a new set of assertions to go through, you can cut down hours of test authoring time and test execution time on a weekly or daily basis. Again, it is the absolute, I think, biggest advantage of using a tool like this, that you can constantly update your UI and not feel that you have to write a new test. You only need to update your baseline, which either programmatically can happen automatically, or it's really as easy as a one-click update in the Applitools UI. So again, this question for me hits home not only with what I think is the biggest challenge, but also with what I think is the biggest benefit that Applitools can give the end user here.
Dan, before you move on,
absolutely.
There's a question from Angelica. What is the difference between hard-to-find locators and a hard-to-use UI?
All right. So hard-to-use UI frameworks are difficult to work with, and hard-to-break locators. I think a lot of this actually is related. A large portion of the UI frameworks dictate how the DOM uses locators, where they are, if they're going to be copied a lot. I'd say that is the difference, though. Locators can be consistent, not be flaky. A lot of UI frameworks, though, will reuse things, will not tag certain sections, so you'll have really componentized front ends that you'll need to either break up on the testing side that development doesn't have to worry about. So development will use a framework like Next, use a lot of nested components. That is great on the development side. On the testing side, though, you now have kind of this messy, again, nest of location, or not really locators, but DOM elements that you need to work with. So it's not so much the locators themselves, but kind of the architecture of the application when we start to use a lot of these frameworks. So very, I would say, nuanced, but for the most part, location and locators have been difficult for the past decade, 2 decades, since the browser was invented. UI frameworks are just now really getting I think, to a mature point, that they're really starting to manipulate the DOM. We're not just talking about Bootstrap here. We're talking about like really full stack, I think, UI frameworks. Great question, though, and I hope I didn't sidestep it too much. All right. So next question, what part of your testing strategy are you using artificial intelligence for today? So you can either feel free to say none, or answer any of the following strategies that are you using any tool that may have AI in it. So either a data tool, a tool like Applitools, so maybe feel liberal in that respect. All right, so currently, most of our respondents are not using any artificial intelligence in their testing strategy. If it was being used, it is being used in test execution. I'm presuming, as someone who's also used AI in the space, they're talking about AI understanding what has changed in their application during a update, and fixing and really dictating what gets executed as part of their tests in that suite. So let's say you have 20 tests that cover your entire application. If maybe one page of your application changed and that was only tested by 2 tests, let's simply run those 2 tests, not have to run all of 10. So that is certainly becoming a popular solution space for AI entering in testing. And we can see here that it is the #1 answer besides none. Now let's look at our poll respondents here with the team. None is a huge aspect of it, and a lot of it mirrors our survey. 20% of you are using test execution or AI in test execution, but even more, again, than our survey are not using AI, which again, pretty normal, 2022. It's been promised a lot, I think. Artificial intelligence has been as far as test authoring, but I think as testers we see a lot of negatives that come with AI being involved in test authoring. Not only being a black hole of what's being tested, but also just not being granular enough when we go to write certain test cases and edge cases. All right, so the last question here. What part of testing strategy do you expect to use AI with in the future? And I would say actually, feel free to just answer once here, once or twice, but give me the one that you really think that AI applies to the most and what you would like to see AI be involved in. All right. So what part of your testing strategy do you expect to use AI in? Again, the top 2 that were really close match the last question, but also we get Applitools involved here a little bit. We had test execution as the #1. Again, I also see some really huge benefits from baking in artificial intelligence, being able to intelligently kick off tests in a manner that works either outside of CI/CD or quickens our testing in CI/CD by just running the applicable tests. That is huge. Second here, though, by a pretty big margin as well, those visual regressions. So this is what Applitools is doing. We're applying artificial intelligence to be able to extend visual testing in a way that wasn't being able to be done before. False positives, movement, dynamic parts of the application, all of that basically made visual testing not able to be done on anything more than a static blog that never changed. So if you updated your test once a week or your blog once a week, and it was all text-based, visual testing with some of the traditional solutions would be fine. If you added any type of dynamic application that needed to serve ads, needed to personalize a dashboard for the user, to do anything like that, visual testing just wasn't able to be done until AI was able to be baked in by Applitools originally and really only uniquely today. So it's great to see those two, I think, in the AI space. Test authoring, which I would say gets the most attention today from artificial intelligence, is consistently voted last, which is always, I think, not surprising to see. But I think a lot of analysts would maybe see test authoring as getting the most attention from vendors today. So we certainly will continue down the visual regression path and hopefully bake out more AI into that. I will show the results here briefly of this last poll. We're at the end of we've concluded our results today of going over the state of UI UX webinar. From here, I would say the best thing that you can do is go check out Applitools, check out a free trial, or contact our technical team to run through a demo and see what parts of your testing strategy today that you may have uncovered via the survey, what parts of that that we can help you with. So the results here, visual regressions, 84%. So really nice to see the bulk want to use AI and visual regressions in the future. Again, a lot of what artificial intelligence can help with is flakiness, false positive, and the ability to test dynamic aspects of an application. All the things that really led visual testing to being this great thing that people talked about, but not actually able to be done in the real world. AI makes that possible, so we would definitely tell you to take a good look at it. But thank you for everyone for showing up today. Thank you also for everyone who participated in the survey. We ran it for 3 weeks. We had over 800 respondents, so it was a huge effort by everyone. And so thank you so much.
Have a great day.